And what I'd like to show you are a few different tricks before we start. First of all, this is painted on real watercolour paper, and what I'm going to do today is use some gold line paper, which is fine for practice, but you will see the difference in the way that the paint spreads on the paper. Next, I am going to be using these colours. Not all of them. I'm putting extra ones for you to see. Now, there are different shades of purples and lilacs, and these colours will affect the way that your painting ends up and the sky ends up. So you're going to decide whether you want really dramatic or a bit more pale and washed out. This colour up here is business yellow, but for this it's a bit too deep. So when you use it on the paper, you're going to use it very, very watery, just to give yourself a light colouring. Next, we have one of the bright pinks, alizarin or permanent opera rose will be fine. This is sap green, and this is sap green lightened up with a little bit of the yellow that was at the top. Okay, so these are the colours you're going to use. Now, I've got artist colours here, but Coachman colours or student colours will do fine. But don't forget, it will make a difference. The paper you use will make a big difference. Now, the next thing I want to show you is about cleaning your brushes. You may think you've cleaned your brush because you put it into water and you've wiggled it around and done this, but you won't know whether you've cleaned it properly until you put it on some paper. And this is what I ended up with when I thought I'd cleaned my brush earlier on. So you must clean your brush and then use some kitchen roll to wipe it, because if you don't clean it properly, that residue on the brush will affect the finished painting. Now, this one is done with very, very pale washes until I got down to here at the bottom, and I just use only some of the rather dilute purple. So this colour, when you put it on top of yellow, if that one or this one, when you put it on top of yellow, will change in colour. All right, you have to remember that. Don't think that you're going to put this on and that on and it's going to end up looking exactly like this. The colour you put underneath will affect the colour on the top. So, end of lecture. Now let's get on with the painting. Right, next we go on to our paper. So I'm using this Gold Line Watercolour Studio Pad, and it's a cotton and lignin-free cellulose mix, which is why it's student grade rather than artist grade, because most artist grades are 100% cotton. It's also only £90 rather than a far heavier paper. I think it's about 160 grams, the proper one. But for practice, it's fine. Now, what I've done is I've divided my paper up into 8 sections using some masking tape. The masking tape will lift afterwards so that you get that nice edge around it, and you'd be surprised how much better it looks when the masking tape comes off. Now, I've been doing some practice here, and we have very bright colours, using quite a dark, thicker yellow. Then I put lots more water in it there and even more water there. And then as I've come down, I have done washes of lighter greens and darker greens. And this is a much cooler green over here, and no red in the, or very, very little red in the sky. Then down here, we've gone for blues. No purples at all, and a much, much colder green here at the bottom, giving a far more wintry effect. So basically, you're going to choose how much yellow you want and which colours you want, because when you choose that, you will get a very different effect for the same painting. And this is why I always say to everyone, you can't repeat a watercolour. The water and the paint goes where it wants to go, within reason. Okay, so let's move all of this out of the way. And Okay, so we'll finally start painting. First thing I've done is I've drawn a very, very faint line along there for my horizon. I'm going to do a low horizon on this one. Then I'm going to take some clean water and I'm going to wet the paper down as far as the horizon line. Watercolours don't travel on dry paper unless you use a brush to make them move, but they will travel on this kind of surface as long as it's wet. Then I have taken from my yellow here, I want remember I told you, a very pale wash. You don't need much paint. And then I'm going to paint across here, and this yellow will travel. And while that's drying ever so slightly, I'm going to get my purple and my red ready. You do need to be careful because the undercoat will affect the colour of the top coat, so just bear that in mind. I think this time I'm going to go for the lovely purple colour. But before I put the purple on, I'm going to allow that paint to dry ever so slightly. You don't want it too dry because it won't travel, but you do want it a little bit dry. And then I'm just going to touch, and that paint is going to move on the paper. Okay, so the next one I'm going to have is my lovely rose colour. You don't have to put two colours, you can put one if you like. Let's do, and you need to make these really, whereas you made your yellow underneath quite light, you make these a lot thicker. Okay. We're still very, very little. And then a tiny little bit more of this. You see what I'm doing? I am just touching very lightly with the brush. And if you want distant clouds to even lighter, a bare touch. Right, now we're going to let it dry. Don't go in with your green as yet because it'll bleed into the yellow. So just that, leave it alone, let it dry. And at the same time, clean your brushes. Right, now that the paint is dried, our next step will be to add the green at the bottom. And you may well see that I've actually done two of these now because I wasn't very keen on that one, but it will still work, but I prefer this one with the paint going up just a little bit rather than in lines. Right, so what I've done here is I have made a couple of different shades of green because, as you saw before, you put the lighter green on first and then you add little dark patches to for where you're going to put the tree and the base of the little fence. So that's probably a bit dark. It's easy if you get your colours sorted first. Right, so we're going to go across here with our green. And in order to give this sort of impression of the grass and the fields, try and go across. I know the temptation is always to try and go down as well, but going across will give you more of that look of feels going across. Right, okay, now that we've done that, let me take a little tiny brush and we're going to go in with a darker green. And what I'm going to do is along there, along the top, a little bit dark again, there we are, along the top, I'm just going to dab, little pointy dabs, and then that will then give the impression of trees in the distance. A bit darker maybe even again. And then here, we want some of this darker stuff, which is going to go on there where the base of the tree is and where the fence is going to be. And that's not quite dark enough for me, so I'm going to darken it up again. Okay, and that's how we get our, move it over just a little bit for you. That's how we get the shading within there. And if you think, oh, it's not quite dark enough there, just go in and dab a little bit more. Don't make the back too dark because then you won't get recession and it'll come forward. So we now have to let that dry as well. And I am going to use, for the tree, and I've got this ready, I'm going to use a little tiny brush, and then in here, no, I don't use black, I rather like Payne's Grey, which is a very deep, deep blue, but it's better than black. It's not quite as, I don't know, nasty is the wrong word, but harsh is maybe the best word. So I use Payne's Grey in there. And if I want to do anything with it, I might put a little bit of green in it. It all depends, okay? But if I'm going to have green, I'd add it over here where I'd already had some green. And this one, because you want it really dark against there, you want to make sure that it's quite an intense shade, all right? Not a wishy-washy water, lots of water, you need it, a lot of paint and not much water. Okay, so we'll let that dry and we'll carry on. Don't try and do anything until it's dry. Right, we're almost on to the final stretch now. The paint has dried and I have here a pretty thick mixture, very little water, of Payne's Grey with a tiny bit of green in it. And I'm going to start approximately there, just up from the bottom and in about 2 centimetres as well. And I want you to think of this as, you can go over it afterwards, but take it up. You don't need to worry about it being too straight. It's a tree. Okay, so a little bit of a wiggle as you're going along, then come back down, come from the bottom, because the bottom's going to have to be thicker than the top. Come up so far and then take this out. Now try and do very light very light. Don't press hard on your brush. Because if you press too hard, you'll end up with lines that are far too thick. And what you want to do is something that looks like the branches of a tree in winter, where they're twiggy and light. I prefer to come from the bottom and out rather than any other way. Okay, and you might want to add a little bit more there if you want to, because these little twigs. So, okay, now, so that looks as if it's floating there a little bit, so we need to darken that up, and you can do it like this. Make it look like you've got some grass, and then we come over here for our little fence. We're starting about somewhere around here. Don't make it too long. And the fence is falling down. Okay, and again we need to put some grasses at the bottom. There we are. And then if you want to do some very light grasses, if you hold onto your brush like this and just splatter it out, you can go in the background and you can put some texture in the background there, and you can put some more here if you like. And there we are. Your little bright landscape is now finished. Once you've done that, once it's dry again, you can take these off and you'll end up with a picture like the one I showed you at the beginning. And off we go. Thank you very much, and let's see what we can do in the class tomorrow.